For 34 years, I was the family joke, a silent loser bowing to their fake perfection. They think I am just a poor tech worker desperate for their pity. What they do not realize is that the glittering empire they used to trample me was built on what they stole from me. Tonight, by cornering me in front of the Silicon Valley elite, they just handed me the key to press the self-destruct button on their lives. Hello to the wonderful audience of Maya Revenge Stories. I want to thank you sincerely for your continuous support and polite company over the years. Unfortunately, YouTube has entirely disabled our monetization features, leaving us without the budget to operate, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here for the foreseeable future and transition our operations to Patreon. If you find today's story captivating, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel. To hear even more incredible, exclusive true stories that are longer, feature detailed situations we cannot make public on YouTube, and include multiple emotional voice actors bringing the drama to life. You can easily join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's tale of justice. My name is Colette Montgomery, and this is the night my family's kingdom of glass finally shattered. The Emerald Marina Club in Seattle was exactly the kind of place my family adored. It was a suffocatingly expensive private yacht club that reeked of old cedar wood, overpriced sea bass, and the desperate need to prove one's wealth to absolute strangers. The air inside our private dining room was thick with the scent of heavy perfume and the obnoxious clinking of crystal champagne flutes. We were supposedly here for a family dinner, but in reality, it was a coronation ceremony. My older sister, Chloe, and her husband, Derek, were celebrating the first seed funding round for their brand new technology application. To my parents, Barbara and Richard, Derek was the second coming of the tech messiah. My father swirled his 20-year-old scotch and practically beamed with pride every time Derek opened his mouth to spout empty Silicon Valley buzzwords. Derek sat at the head of the table, his sleeves rolled up just enough to flash his ostentatious gold watch, dominating the conversation with loud, booming declarations about disrupting the market and shifting paradigms. Chloe sat next to him, wearing a designer dress that cost more than my parents' first car, nodding along with a smug, self-satisfied smile plastered across her face. And then there was me. I sat quietly near the end of the table, nursing a glass of sparkling water, wearing a simple navy blazer. For my entire life, I had been the designated disappointment. To them, I was just the tragic sister who failed to launch. So, Colette, my mother, Barbara, suddenly chimed in, her voice dripping with that signature brand of maternal condescension. Are you still doing those little gig jobs? The computer repair things? I placed my glass down softly on the linen tablecloth. I am a freelance cybersecurity engineer, Mother. I do not repair computers. Derek let out a loud, barking laugh, waving his hand dismissively in my direction. Come on, Colette, it is basically the same thing. Once we get our Series A funding finalized, I could probably find a spot for you at our IT help desk. You would have to start at the bottom, of course, but it would be a real job. My father nodded in grave agreement. You should listen to Derek. He is building an empire. You cannot just float through life fixing broken hard drives for minimum wage. I did not argue. I never argued. For 15 years, I had perfected the art of silent endurance. I let them believe whatever they wanted to believe, because the truth was something their narrow, status-obsessed minds could never comprehend. They thought I was a poor, struggling tech worker desperate for their pity. They had no idea who I really was. Seeing my silence, Chloe decided it was her turn to strike. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her perfectly manicured hands, her eyes glinting with pure malice. Derek, do not give her false hope. Getting a real job is the least of her worries right now. She needs to focus on her personal life. Chloe turned to me, her voice projecting across the room so the waiters could hear. I mean, Colette, you are 34 years old and still single. At this point, it is honestly a tragedy. My mother immediately burst into high-pitched laughter, gently slapping the table. Oh, Chloe, stop it. You are terrible. She then looked at me, her smile tight and insincere. She is just joking, dear. It is just a little joke. But truly, your biological clock is not just ticking, it is sounding a fire alarm. The entire table erupted into laughter again. It was the same script we had played out 1,000 times before. I was the punching bag, the punchline, the reliable failure. They used to make themselves feel superior. Usually, I would simply stare at my plate, let the humiliation wash over me, and wait for the check to arrive. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was done shrinking myself to fit into their delusion. I did not look down. I did not blush. I leaned back in my mahogany chair, rested my hands in my lap, and looked directly into my sister's eyes. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting their laughter die out awkwardly in the quiet room. "Do not worry about me, Chloe," I said, my voice completely calm, devoid of any anger or defensive tremor. "I have been married for 4 years." The reaction was instantaneous. The clinking of silverware stopped. My father choked slightly on his scotch. My mother stared at me as if I had just spoken to her in a dead language. "What on earth are you talking about?" Barbara snapped, her fake smile vanishing instantly. "Married? To whom? You live in a tiny apartment and you never bring anyone around." "It is a lie," Chloe sneered, crossing her arms defensively. "She is just saying that because she is embarrassed. Married for 4 years? Please, who would marry you?" Derek leaned across the table, his face flushed with arrogance and alcohol. He slammed his hand down next to his plate. "All right, Colette, if you are so happily married, prove it. Call him. Call this imaginary husband of yours right now and tell him to get down here. Let us meet the lucky guy." He leaned back, looking incredibly pleased with himself, entirely convinced he had just called my bluff. He expected me to stutter, to make an excuse, to run out of the restaurant in tears. I did not reach for my phone. I simply took a sip of my water. "I do not need to call him." "Oh, how convenient," Chloe laughed loudly, rolling her eyes at our parents. "He must be busy fixing someone else's internet connection." Less than 2 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of our private dining room swung open. The room suddenly felt very small. Marcus stepped inside. He was dressed in a razor-sharp, bespoke charcoal suit that commanded absolute attention. Every detail about him, from his expensive leather shoes to the subtle gold tie clip, radiated a quiet, terrifying level of wealth and authority. He carried himself with the poised power of a man who owned the building, the yachts outside, and everyone in the room. My family sat frozen in their seats, their mouths slightly parted in shock, as this devastatingly handsome, powerful stranger walked straight past Derek without even glancing at him. Marcus stopped behind my chair, placed a warm hand on my shoulder, and leaned down to press a soft kiss against my temple. "I am so sorry I am late, darling," Marcus said, his deep, resonant voice easily filling the silent room. The board of directors meeting ran an hour longer than I anticipated. I hope I did not miss the appetizers. He stood tall, offering a breathtakingly polite smile to the table of statues before him. My mother dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate, echoing perfectly in the absolute, undeniable silence of the room. The silence, stretching across the private dining room, was palpable, heavy enough to drown in. My father cleared his throat, his face flushing a deep shade of crimson as he struggled to process the sudden shift in the room's gravity. Marcus effortlessly pulled up a chair beside me, signaling for the waiter to bring an extra glass of scotch. "I suppose introductions are in order," my father finally managed to say, nervously adjusting his collar. "I am Richard Montgomery. This is my wife, Barbara. And you are?" "Marcus," he replied, shaking my father's hand with a firm, practiced grip. "It is a pleasure to finally meet the family Colette has told me so much about." Chloe scrutinized Marcus from across the table, her eyes darting aggressively over the impeccable stitching of his charcoal lapel and the subtle gleam of his platinum watch. She was desperately trying to find a flaw, a crack in his armor, but there was none. So, she aimed for the only thing she understood, which was social status. "So, Marcus," Chloe began, her voice dripping with a sickly artificial sweetness. What exactly is it that you do? Because my sister here is just a freelance computer technician who barely scrapes by. We always assumed she would end up with someone in the exact same tax bracket, maybe a nice retail manager. Marcus smiled, a soft, polite expression that did not quite reach his sharp, calculating eyes. I work in finance, specifically, investment risk assessment. The tension in the room instantly evaporated, replaced by a collective, almost audible sigh of relief from my family. In their shallow minds, risk assessment translated perfectly to a mid-level corporate drone, a spreadsheet jockey trapped in a gray cubicle. To them, the bespoke suit was probably rented or bought on credit, just to impress them for one night. I watched Derek's posture change in real time. His chest puffed out, his shoulders broadened to take up more space, and that unbearable, arrogant smirk returned to his face. The alpha male had reclaimed his perceived territory. Bean counter, Derek chuckled loudly, leaning back in his chair and swirling the expensive red wine in his glass. That is a tough gig, man, clocking in at 9 in the morning, clocking out at 5 in the evening, answering to a boss all day long. I respect the daily grind, I really do. But you know, the real money is in creation, disruption. You have to be a true visionary to make a mark in this world. Is that so? Marcus asked, his tone perfectly even, projecting a masterclass of genuine curiosity. Absolutely, Derek boasted, leaning forward and resting his elbows heavily on the linen tablecloth. You see, Marcus, I am currently leading a highly disruptive tech startup. We are utilizing decentralized data scraping algorithms to synthesize user metrics, optimizing the synergy between back-end cloud architecture and front-end consumer engagement. It is a highly scalable paradigm shift that will change everything. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water to hide my intense amusement. Derek was throwing together meaningless technology buzzwords like a child playing with alphabet blocks, completely unaware that he was speaking to a man who dismantled and destroyed multi-billion-dollar portfolios before his morning coffee. Fascinating, Marcus said smoothly, resting his hands on the table. And how exactly is the market responding to this paradigm shift of yours? Derek slammed his hand on the table, grinning like a lottery winner. We are about to get acquired. A massive venture capital firm down in Silicon Valley is eyeing us for our series of funding. We are talking about an 8-figure buyout, $10 million minimum. In fact, I am flying down to pitch directly to their executive board at the end of this week. It is a closed-door meeting with the absolute heavy hitters of the industry. An 8-figure buyout, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. That is quite a monumental achievement. Derek, you must be very confident in your software's source code. The code is bulletproof, Derek boasted, aggressively adjusting his tie. My team built the entire architecture from the ground up. Chloe chimed in, tossing her hair over her shoulder with a haughty laugh. Derek is a genius. And we are just so blessed. It is a shame Colette never had the drive to build something of her own. But I suppose we cannot all be brilliant entrepreneurs. Someone has to do the clerical work and fix the broken routers, right? My mother patted Chloe's arm approvingly, looking at me with fake pity. Now, Chloe, do not be mean. We are just happy. Colette found someone willing to settle down with her, even if it took her 34 years. And Marcus, dear, please do not feel intimidated by Derek's massive success. We know perfectly well that not everyone can be a millionaire by age 35. I am not intimidated at all, Barbara, Marcus replied, his voice a perfect melody of polite restraint. I find Derek's ambition to be incredibly enlightening. When the black leather-bound checkbook finally arrived, Marcus casually reached for it, but Derek aggressively snatched it away, waving his hand in a grand theatrical gesture for the whole room to see. Put your little wallet away, Marcus, Derek commanded, pulling a heavy metal credit card from his pocket and tossing it onto the tray. I have got this. A dinner like this would probably wipe out your entire monthly salary in one night. Consider it an early celebration of my upcoming buyout. Think of it as just a little charity for the working class. How incredibly generous of you, Derek, Marcus said, inclining his head slightly, not breaking eye contact. We appreciate it deeply. Yes, I added, looking Derek dead in the eye while keeping my face entirely blank. Thank you for the meal. We left them sitting at the table, basking blindly in the toxic glow of their own fabricated superiority. The walk through the marina parking lot was quiet, the cool Seattle wind whipping off the dark water and rustling the sails of the docked yachts. We did not speak a single word until we reached the private valet section, waiting for the attendant to bring our car around to the front. Marcus stood beside me in the dim, yellowed light of the parking lot. He turned his head toward me, a slow, predatory smile finally breaking across his handsome face. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous murmur that sent a shiver down my spine. His application's source code, Marcus said softly, his eyes glinting in the dark. It looks remarkably familiar. The drive back to downtown Seattle was a blur of neon city lights and rain-slicked asphalt reflecting against the tinted windows of our car. We pulled into the highly secure, private underground garage of the Obsidian Tower, bypassing the main lobby entirely. The doors of our private elevator parted smoothly, revealing our actual home. It was a sprawling, glass-walled penthouse occupying the entire top floor, offering an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the city skyline. This was the luxurious reality my family was completely oblivious to. While they spent all their energy projecting an image of new wealth, Marcus and I lived in the quiet, untouchable stratosphere of absolute power. I kicked off my heels, walking straight past the designer living room and entering my sanctuary. The master control room was heavily climate-controlled, humming continuously with the low, steady vibration of enterprise-grade server racks. The space was dominated by a massive curved desk featuring 6 ultra-high-definition monitors. My family loved to aggressively mock my supposedly pathetic freelance gig, but they did not know the truth. I was the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Nexus Solutions. It was a phantom cybersecurity firm currently valued at over $3 billion. We built the digital fortresses that secured the confidential data of multinational banks, defense contractors, and elite financial institutions. Marcus was my brilliant business partner and the public face of the operation. He was the charismatic predator who navigated the cutthroat venture capital boardrooms, while I operated entirely from the shadows, holding the digital keys to the kingdom. Marcus took off his suit jacket, rolling up his sleeves as he approached my workstation. He reached into his pocket and handed me a heavy, encrypted titanium flash drive. Derek submitted his company's entire technical prospectus to my firm's acquisition committee exactly 48 hours ago, Marcus said, his voice dropping the polite facade he wore at dinner and adopting a sharp, professional tone. He is aggressively asking for $15 million in initial seed funding. I need you to take a look at his back-end architecture. I plugged the drive into an isolated, secure terminal. Derek had protected his proprietary files with a standard commercial encryption key. It was genuinely pathetic. It took my decryption software less than 30 seconds to bypass his elementary security protocols and extract the raw source code of his supposedly revolutionary application. I dragged the compiled files onto my primary monitors, watching thousands of lines of complex programming language cascade across the black screens in rapid succession. I initiated a comprehensive structural analysis, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard as I searched for the vulnerabilities Marcus had hinted at during our walk to the car. However, as my eyes scanned the core logic loops in the foundational architecture of the application, a sudden, icy chill ran violently down my spine. The room felt as if the temperature had instantly dropped 20 degrees. I stopped typing entirely. I leaned closer to the glowing screens, my heart pounding, a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Code is like a fingerprint. Every software engineer has a unique signature, a specific way they name their variables, a distinct method for structuring data arrays, and a personal rhythm to their logic sequences. I knew this code intimately. I recognized the highly unconventional error-handling architecture. I recognized the specific syntax used to bridge the database queries. I knew it all because I had written this exact algorithm exactly 5 years ago. It was a highly sophisticated, proprietary data sorting engine I had developed as a personal passion project right after finishing graduate school. I had stored the absolute only offline backup on an external hard drive. I remembered perfectly that I had accidentally left that specific drive inside a desk drawer in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house. I stared blindly at the screen, a suffocating, nauseating wave of betrayal crashing over me. My parents did not just stumble upon it. They must have intentionally rummaged through my personal belongings, found the drive, realized it contained complex software, and handed it directly over to Derek to evaluate. My own flesh and blood had robbed my intellectual property in the dark. They gave my sister's husband the foundation to build a fake technology empire, all while sitting across from me at dinner for years, looking me dead in the eye, and calling me a pathetic failure. The sheer audacity of their crime was almost too massive to process. "Colette?" Marcus asked softly, placing a warm, grounding hand on my rigid shoulder. "What exactly did you find in there?" "It is my code," I whispered, the harsh reality tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. Derek stole my offline backup from my parents' house. The core engine of his entire startup is my intellectual property. But as I scrolled further down the digital architecture, the betrayal rapidly morphed into absolute, unadulterated horror. Derek was a total charlatan. He did not possess even a fraction of the technical intellect required to understand the complex algorithm he had stolen. In his desperate, greedy attempt to turn my secure data sorting engine into a highly profitable consumer data scraping application, he had brutally butchered the source code. I rapidly opened a diagnostic terminal and ran an aggressive, simulated penetration test on his heavily modified framework. The results flashed back across the screen in alarming, bright red text. Derek had completely bypassed the fundamental encryption layers because he likely wanted to make the application run faster on mobile devices, prioritizing speed over basic safety. "This is not just intellectual property theft," I said, my voice hardening into a blade of pure, sharp ice. "Look at this integration point right here." Derek tried to hotwire the data collection modules without understanding the security protocols. By doing so, he accidentally created a massive, gaping backdoor in the system infrastructure. Any competent hacker could walk right through this application and instantly access the personal, financial, and geographic data of every single user who downloads it. Marcus leaned over my shoulder, his sharp eyes narrowing as he quickly read the diagnostic report on the screen. "He is practically building a digital sieve. If this application launches to the public, it will cause a catastrophic data breach within days." "It is significantly worse than a simple data breach," I replied, my hands gripping the cold edge of the desk until my knuckles turned completely white. "This is a severe, undeniable violation of federal cybersecurity laws. If your venture capital firm acquires this company and pushes this software to the public market, the legal liability will be astronomical. My family did not just steal my brainpower to buy Chloe a new mansion. They are actively preparing to sell a highly illegal, ticking time bomb to the global tech market, and they are completely, blissfully oblivious to the federal prison sentences waiting for them." At 8 in the morning the very next day, I was standing in the cramped, poorly lit lobby of the Decoy apartment complex I still rented on the outskirts of the city to maintain my carefully constructed facade. I was simply retrieving some forwarded mail when the heavy glass entrance doors were violently pushed open. My mother and my sister marched inside, looking utterly ridiculous in their thick designer coats and oversized sunglasses, treating the modest linoleum floor like an infected quarantine zone. They had obviously done their research overnight. The smug arrogance from the yacht club had been completely replaced by a frantic, aggressive desperation. "We know exactly who he is," my mother spat, ignoring any basic greeting as she cornered me near the rusted metal mailboxes. "Your little husband. We looked up his venture capital firm. He is not just some low-level risk assessor. He is the managing director of the exact committee that holds the keys to Derek's Series A funding." I slowly closed my mailbox, the metal door echoing loudly in the empty hallway. I turned to face them, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "Is that so? And what exactly do you want, Mother?" "What do I want?" she hissed, her eyes darting around the cheap lobby in absolute disgust. "I want you to stop playing these petty, vindictive games. Derek is the visionary of this family, and his company needs that $15 million capital injection immediately. You are going to go home. You are going to sit Marcus down, and you are going to make absolutely sure he signs the approval paperwork by the end of the day." Chloe stepped forward, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, a nervous tremor betraying her usual arrogant posture. "Derek has leveraged everything on this buyout. Do you hear me? Everything. We have 3 mortgages on the new house, and the credit cards are entirely maxed out. If this deal falls through, we are completely ruined. You owe us this. You need to tell Marcus to push the funds through without any of that tedious due diligence nonsense." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of their demand hung heavily in the stale air. They did not come to apologize for completely dismissing my husband the night before. They did not come to make amends for 15 years of relentless psychological abuse. They came to order me to use my marriage as a tool to bail out a man who had literally stolen my intellectual property to fund his fraudulent lifestyle. I looked at my mother, a woman who had spent my entire life treating me like an unwanted burden. "No, I am not telling Marcus to do anything. Derek's software is a complete disaster, and your severe financial mismanagement is absolutely not my problem." My mother's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, trying to use the same bullying tactics that used to make me cry when I was a teenager. "Listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful wretch," she threatened, her voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly whisper. "If you ruin this for your sister, if you let your petty jealousy destroy Derek's empire, I will call the estate lawyers this very afternoon. I will completely write you out of the family will. You will never set foot on your grandparents' coastal estate ever again. That property will go entirely to Chloe, and you will be left with absolutely nothing." The coastal estate was the only place where I had ever felt truly safe as a child. It was a beautiful, quiet refuge filled with the only happy memories I possessed before my grandparents passed away. My mother knew it was the one piece of leverage she had left over my heart. She expected me to break. She expected the tears to well up in my eyes, expected me to panic and instantly submit to her authority just to hold on to that single shred of nostalgia. Instead, I felt absolutely nothing. The last remaining invisible thread tying me to these toxic women simply snapped, dissolving into permanent dust. Chloe scoffed loudly, misinterpreting my silence as surrender. "You have always been so bitterly jealous of my happiness. You finally find a man who actually has a decent job, and the first thing you do is try to weaponize him against my husband because you cannot stand the fact that Derek is a real genius. It is pathetic. Now do your job as a sister and fix this." I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply tilted my head, looking at the 2 desperate, ugly souls trapped beneath their expensive clothing, and a slow, freezing smile spread across my face. "All right," I said smoothly, my voice soft and deadly. "You win. I will not stand in the way of Derek's massive success." Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, her posture instantly relaxing, while my mother offered a triumphant, satisfied smirk, thoroughly convinced her petty threat had easily crushed my spirit. "Tell Derek to prepare himself," I continued, making sure my eyes locked firmly onto my sister's. "Tell him to put on his best suit. The final deal-closing meeting will not happen in some boring boardroom. It will take place at the Global Tech Conference this weekend. Marcus wants to make a very public announcement regarding the acquisition of Derek's revolutionary software on the main stage." "The main stage?" Chloe gasped, her eyes widening with absolute greedy delight. "Oh my goodness, that is perfect. That is exactly what Derek deserves." "Yes," I replied quietly, turning my back on them and walking toward the glass exit doors. "It is exactly what he deserves." They practically strutted out of the lobby, buzzing with arrogant excitement, utterly blind to the reality of the situation. They thought they had just bullied me into total submission. They had absolutely no idea that I had just finished tying the perfect knot on the rope they would use to hang themselves. The main hall of the Seattle Convention Center was a cavernous theater of modern power. It was Saturday evening, and the Global Tech Conference had drawn over 5,000 of the most influential venture capitalists, credentialed journalists, and elite cybersecurity experts in the United States. Massive 50-foot digital screens bathed the auditorium in a sharp, electric blue glow. The low hum of thousands of hushed conversations created a heavy, expectant energy that vibrated right through the carpeted floors. This was not a local yacht club dinner. This was the undisputed epicenter of the technology world, and the air was thick with the scent of real, unimaginable wealth. Sitting dead center in the front row, completely bathed in the stage lights, was my family. They had clearly spent a small fortune on their wardrobes, treating the professional summit like a glamorous red carpet. My mother was draped in heavy silk and diamonds, waving regally to passing executives who had absolutely no idea who she was. My father sat beside her, puffing his chest out like a proud peacock. But Derek was the true spectacle. He was out of his seat, pacing the VIP aisle in an expensive tuxedo, aggressively shoving his startup business cards into the hands of any passing investor. I could hear his obnoxious voice carrying over the ambient noise as he shouted about his upcoming multi-million-dollar acquisition. He was acting like a conquering king waiting for his crown, completely oblivious to the fact that he was standing on a perfectly constructed trapdoor. I stood quietly in the heavy shadows of the backstage wings, observing them through the gap in the velvet curtains. I had traded my modest navy blazer for a custom-tailored, stark white designer suit that radiated absolute authority. However, to my family, sitting a mere 20 feet away, I was still completely invisible, or so I thought. Chloe, dressed in a sparkling emerald gown, suddenly spotted me standing near the stage manager's podium. She excused herself from my parents, marched arrogantly up the side stairs, and bypassed the backstage security guard simply by pointing at her premium VIP badge. She strutted into the dim backstage area, a look of utter superiority plastered across her face. She looked me up and down, letting out a sharp, mocking scoff. "I see Marcus let you tag along to carry his briefcase," Chloe whispered, her voice dripping with pure poison. "I have to admit, you clean up moderately well for a freelance technician. Just make sure you stay back here in the shadows where you belong. Derek is about to make technology history tonight, and I will not have you ruining our press photos with your pathetic, jealous energy." I looked at my sister. This was the woman who had gladly built her luxurious life on my stolen intellectual property. I felt absolutely no anger anymore, only a deep, profound emptiness. "Do not worry, Chloe," I replied, my voice completely smooth and dangerously calm. "I promise you, I will be out of the shadows very soon. I sincerely hope you and Derek are ready for your big moment." She rolled her eyes, scoffing once more before turning on her heels. "Just watch and learn, Colette. This is what real success looks like." She strutted back to her front row seat, just as the massive auditorium lights suddenly went pitch black. The low rumble of the crowd instantly died down to a breathless silence. A single, blinding white spotlight snapped on, hitting the center of the main stage. The booming voice of the unseen announcer filled the room, introducing the managing director of the industry's most ruthless venture capital firm. The applause was deafening. Marcus walked out from the opposite side of the stage in his perfectly cut obsidian suit. He stopped precisely at the center, letting the thunderous applause wash over him for 30 seconds before he finally raised a hand to silence the room. "Good evening," Marcus began, his resonant voice echoing flawlessly. "Tonight, we are here to discuss limitless innovation, but more importantly, we are here to talk about the absolute necessity of digital integrity in an era where consumer data is more valuable than gold. True innovation cannot ever be built on a foundation of deception. Our firm demands total transparency, rigorous cybersecurity, and uncompromising ethics from every single company we bring into our portfolio." Down in the front row, Derek aggressively nodded along, slapping his knee in enthusiastic agreement. I watched him casually unbutton his tuxedo jacket, adjusting his silk tie with a smug grin. He shifted his weight to the edge of his seat, his muscles tensed, fully preparing to sprint up the stairs and claim his imaginary kingdom the very second his name was called. Marcus paused, his sharp gaze sweeping over the audience before locking directly onto Derek. A cold, dangerous smile touched Marcus's mouth. For several months, the global market has speculated about who actually pulls the strings at our firm. Marcus continued, his voice echoing with undeniable authority. People wonder who built the digital fortress that protects our investments. And to make the final, definitive decision on today's acquisitions, I will not be the one speaking. Instead, please welcome the true brain behind our entire investment fund, the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Nexus Solutions. The heavy velvet curtains parted smoothly, and I stepped out from the shadows into the blinding glare of a dozen high-intensity stage lights. I was wearing a stark white, custom-tailored designer suit that caught the illumination perfectly, turning me into a focal point of absolute, undeniable power. As my real name and my title were projected in massive letters onto the 50-foot digital screens behind me, the entire auditorium reacted. Thousands of the most influential industry titans, elite investors, and brilliant engineers immediately rose to their feet. They delivered a deafening, thunderous standing ovation, paying their utmost respect to the phantom architect who had quietly secured their digital assets for years. I walked slowly and deliberately to the center of the main stage. Stopping right beside Marcus, I did not immediately look down at the front row. I let the massive wave of applause wash over me for a long 60 seconds, letting the sheer weight of my reality fill the cavernous room. When the crowd finally settled back into their seats, the silence that followed was electric. Then, I lowered my gaze to the VIP section. My family was completely paralyzed. They looked like grotesque statues carved out of pure, unadulterated terror. Derek was frozen in a half-standing position, the smug, arrogant grin literally melting off his face as the crystal water glass slipped from his trembling fingers. It shattered loudly against the hard floor, the sharp noise piercing the quiet room. Chloe sat right beside him, her jaw practically unhinged, her eyes wide with a manic, uncomprehending shock. My parents were completely rigid, their expensive clothes suddenly looking like cheap costumes as all the blood rapidly drained from their faces. I did not offer them a single ounce of pity. I did not even look at them again. I turned my attention entirely to the thousands of professionals waiting for my final verdict. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I said, my voice projecting crisp, clear, and razor-sharp through the state-of-the-art sound system. Tonight, we were supposed to finalize a $15 million seed funding acquisition for a highly anticipated data analytics application. However, before my firm signs any checks or endorses any product, I always insist on performing a comprehensive live architectural audit. I pressed a small button on the presentation remote in my hand. The massive digital screens behind me instantly shifted from my company logo to a complex, cascading wall of back-end programming code. What you are looking at is the proprietary source code submitted to our acquisition committee exactly 3 days ago, I announced, pacing slowly across the stage, my voice hardening into a weapon of absolute destruction. It was presented to us as a revolutionary breakthrough in data synthesis. It is not a breakthrough. It is a blatant, unoriginal forgery. A low murmur of confusion rippled through the massive crowd. 5 years ago, I continued, projecting my voice over the noise, I personally developed a highly specialized data sorting algorithm for enterprise-level security. The code currently displayed on this screen is an exact, line-for-line copy of my intellectual property, stolen directly from an offline hard drive. A collective, echoing gasp filled the auditorium. I pressed another button, highlighting massive sections of the code in glowing red. "But the theft is actually the least of our concerns tonight," I stated with cold, clinical precision. The individual who stole this framework did not possess the basic technical literacy required to understand it. In a desperate, greedy attempt to monetize the application, he completely bypassed the foundational encryption protocols. He brutally altered the core logic loops to scrape user data at a faster rate. I paused, letting the heavy silence hang in the air, ensuring every single person in the room understood the gravity of my next words. By doing so, he accidentally created an unauthorized, fully exposed backdoor directly into the application's central server infrastructure. Right now, as we speak, This software is actively compromising the personal, geographic, and financial data of over 500,000 existing users. It is an unmitigated federal disaster. The auditorium erupted into a chaotic frenzy. Investors shouted in outrage, and credentialed journalists furiously began typing on their laptops. The massive overhead broadcasting cameras immediately swung down from the ceiling, zooming in directly on the front row. Derek's pale, intensely sweating face was suddenly broadcast onto the 50-foot screens for the entire world to witness. He looked like a trapped rat, frantically shaking his head in denial, his mouth opening and closing without making a sound. Chloe leaped out of her seat, her voice cracking as she screamed a weak, pathetic defense toward the stage. But her words were completely drowned out by the deafening, angry roar of the crowd. My mother literally collapsed backward into her plush chair, her hands covering her face as the horrifying reality of federal liability finally crushed her delusions of grandeur. But my presentation was not over yet. I had already forwarded my comprehensive technical audit to the Cybercrime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation 24 hours earlier. From the corner of my eye, I watched the heavy emergency exit doors at the back of the auditorium swing open. A dozen federal agents, wearing dark windbreakers, moved silently and swiftly down the carpeted aisles. The press cameras flashed blindingly, like a chaotic lightning storm. As the agents completely surrounded the VIP row, they grabbed Derek by the arms and pulled him roughly out of his seat. He sobbed openly, a pathetic, broken mess of a man. The sharp, metallic click of heavy handcuffs snapping around his wrists was picked up by the boom microphones, echoing through the cavernous hall like a final, definitive death knell for their fake empire. The fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely merciless. Within 72 hours, Derek's fraudulent company collapsed completely under the crushing weight of federal indictments and massive, unstoppable class action lawsuits. The financial devastation wiped out my family entirely. The 3 mortgages, the maxed-out credit cards, and the astronomical legal fees forced my parents and Chloe into absolute, undeniable bankruptcy. They had to immediately liquidate every single asset they owned, including their luxury cars, their designer jewelry, and the beloved coastal estate they had so proudly used to threaten me just days prior, all just to pay off a fraction of the initial damages. Late that Sunday evening, I sat comfortably on the plush velvet sofa in my penthouse, holding a glass of very expensive red wine. My phone buzzed quietly on the glass coffee table. The screen lit up, displaying a long, desperate text message from my mother. She was begging for my forgiveness, pleading with me to use my massive wealth and industry connections to save them from total ruin. I stared at her pathetic, crawling words for a long moment. I searched my heart, and I felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger, no sorrow, and no lingering pain. There was only a peaceful, cleansing silence. I did not type a reply. I simply pressed the block button, permanently severing their access to my life. I turned the phone off completely and tossed it aside. Marcus sat down beside me, wrapping his strong arm warmly around my shoulders. I leaned my head against him, taking a slow sip of my wine as we looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights glittering brightly in the dark night below us, officially burying those toxic people in the past forever. Thank you all so incredibly much for taking the time to listen to this story today. I would really love to know, where are you tuning in from? Please leave a comment down below and let me know your city or your country. As a quick reminder, because YouTube has unfortunately disabled our monetization features, we simply do not have the budget to keep this channel running here, which means we will not be uploading any new videos in the foreseeable future. We are officially transitioning our operations over to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's journey and want to continue supporting us, please help by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel. Over there, you can listen to the absolute best, longest, and most exclusive true stories that we cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join us by scanning the Patreon QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by clicking the direct link we have provided in the description box or the pinned comment of this video. Thank you again for everything, and take care.